This is a public forum on opioid epidemic awareness. The purpose of this meeting is to share information, to educate, to just get the word out there that this is an epidemic and what we can do moving forward, working together as a community. My name is Patty Roberts, and I'm a resident of this great city. As we are all aware, there's an epidemic sweeping across the world, the United States, the state of Florida, and as you'll learn more about tonight, our very own city. And that epidemic is opioid substance misuse disorder. Excuse me. 2 of the 3 of us presenting tonight have personally been impacted by this epidemic, and so I want to thank you for the opportunity to share my experience on this topic. I'm just going to give you a brief background on why I'm here, and then we're going to actually get to the heart of the presentation. Just 529 days ago, or just over 17 months ago, a police officer arrived at my house on Saturday, August 18th of 2018 to advise us that our 22-year-old son, Danny, had died of a heroin overdose. He had overdosed not in Miami or Orlando, but right here in PSL, just that morning after being transported to PSL Medical Hospital. I'll share a little bit more about Danny's journey and mine as a mother in a little bit, but we're gonna get to the heart of the presentation, and for that, I don't know how we lucked out with this connection, but we do have Dr. Deb Dreher in the house. Dr. Dreher is the Chief Clinical Officer at New Horizons, and she is gonna share with you one of the most important and really significant impactful presentations that I have seen on this epidemic. So with no further ado, I will introduce Dr. Deb Dreher.
Before I start, couple disclosures. I do work for New Horizons, but I'm really here on behalf of the Treasure Coast Opioid Task Force. I'm not here to get you to come into treatment at New Horizons. We are not-for-profit and we don't sell our services, so I just wanted to make sure you understood that it's conflict-free in that regard. The second thing I want to tell you is in the back, sitting by the tables, I have 2 staff members. One is Ann Latirzo. She's the one that bothered to wear her badge tonight. She's a licensed mental health professional, and she runs our mobile crisis service. And she's here in case, for any reason, this is kind of a sensitive subject. If anybody gets upset and wants to talk, she's there. And certainly after the presentation, you might have questions about family members or friends. She might be your go-to girl. I know stuff, but I'm a nurse. She's a counselor. I'm going to direct you that way. And also sitting with her is Lisa Cerveniak. She is in recovery herself. She is a peer specialist, and she works with us in our medication-assisted treatment program. So they're available. If you do get upset and you need to leave the room, let them know. But if you're just going to the bathroom, let them know that too, or they'll probably follow you. You don't want that to happen. Our goal here tonight is basically to give you information about the opioid crisis, how it's affecting this community in particular, and hopefully my biggest goal is to kind of reduce the stigma so that people, friends, family members, you can talk to and that they might get into treatment and thus save some lives. So that's really what we're here for. I'm going to start by giving you a little history of opioids and the crisis and how we got where we are today. Then I'm going to give you, I promise I'll keep it short because my staff gets really mad when I do too much neurobiology. So I'll keep it pretty short, but I want you to understand how use of opioids changes the brain. And then I'm going to give you some signs of addiction, signs of overdose, what to do, okay? If you have questions, I don't mind. In the middle, that's fine, whatever. So we want to keep it sort of interactive. I don't want you to feel like you have to sit there quietly through the whole thing. So About 3400 BC, believe it or not. Did anyone watch Game of Thrones? Oh, come on, admit it. Seriously, thank you. I did too. And you might have heard them use the word the milk of the poppy. I presented one time and somebody came up afterwards and said, oh, I thought they were saying milk of the puppy. It was pretty funny. But about 3400 BC, it was discovered in Mesopotamia, and it was used then, and it was named, for obvious reasons, the joy plant. Because, in fact, when you first use an opioid, it does bring some euphoria along with it. In about 400 to 350 BC, Hippocrates, I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's supposed to be the father of modern medicine, the one that says, first do no harm. He used them for, you're going to love this, women's diseases. So they used opium then. It wasn't until the 1800s that they isolated morphine from the plant, and it was named morphine because it was named after the god of dreams, Morpheus. So there's a little bit of interesting history. The first time we had an epidemic was after the Civil War. And that's because they used morphine for amputations. They didn't have anesthesia back then, so they used morphine. And then what do you think happened to these soldiers after the war? They were hooked on it, and they went into withdrawal, and they called it then soldier's disease. Then in 1898, you've all heard of Bayer aspirin? They were able to produce heroin, and they marketed it over the counter for coughs because, by the way, opioids work well for coughs. And it wasn't until about 1914, I might get my year wrong, it could have been 25, I can't ever remember, that the United States banned the use of heroin over the counter. So for that 25 years or so, people could just go buy heroin for coughs. You might have anybody watched the movie Tombstone? No? They showed in there, I can't remember, Wyatt Earp's wife. She was actually addicted to Dilaudid. And it's a really good depiction of what you go through when you have this issue in that movie. Okay, let's go up to 1988. Now, I became a nurse shortly after the Civil War. And when I was taught nursing, I was taught that we only use opioids for end-stage cancer pain or post-surgically. We didn't use it for everything else. But in 1988, in a letter to the editor of the Journal of the American Medical Association, a couple of doctors wrote a letter and said, hey, you don't have to just limit the use to end-stage cancer pain. You can use it for back pain, and you can use it for arm pain, and any kind of pain you want. And guess what? We're not experiencing any addiction. So that morphed into some more problems. Purdue Pharma then created OxyContin. They marketed it heavily because now we can give OxyContin for any kind of pain, not just end-stage cancer pain. In fact, they had a little, you know those little movies when you go to the doctor's in the doctor's office and it tells you to eat blueberries and strawberries and be healthy? Well, they had a little movie and it promoted OxyContin, and it was called, are you ready? I Got My Life Back. The truth is anything but that. Then around 2001, the Joint Commission on the Accreditation of Hospitals took up the flag and said, you know what? We should be assessing everybody for pain. So if anyone comes into the emergency room, you have to ask them how much pain they're in. Now, you're all adults, you've all been to the emergency room at least once. You've seen those strips of smiley and unhappy faces, and they tell you to point to one, right? Okay, if you're a doctor and somebody points to that really unhappy face, there's some kind of bug up here. And they say, I'm in a tremendous amount of pain. What are you going to do as a doctor? You're going to treat it. You're going to prescribe. So we ended up with all these prescriptions, and that ballooned by into the early part of this century. In Florida, we had pill mills. I don't know if any of you were here or remember that, but you could basically drive down 95 from any of the northeastern states. You could go into a strip mall here, and you'd get a doctor to listen to your lungs and take your blood pressure and tell them you're in pain and get a prescription for OxyContin. Now in 2010, the pill mills were shut down. So what happened? We had all kinds of people, through no fault of their own, they were prescribed these medications. We all trust our doctors, or at least we did. And for good reason, you can trust your doctor. But I've had so many people say, well, I was prescribed it, right? And so then we shut down the pill mills, and they were addicted. They had no place to go but the streets. And so they went to heroin. And here's the problem. It's not your grandmother's heroin anymore. It's different heroin today than what they had back in the day. You can flip. I'm not going to go over that. This is a great illustration. It shows how much heroin it takes to overdose on. Next to that is a drug called fentanyl. Have you heard of fentanyl? Some of you have. Fentanyl is currently used in patches in end-stage cancer pain, and it does have a place in modern medicine. I want to tell you this because I had an EMT once at one of these presentations say, don't scare people, because if they're in a horrendous car accident, the EMT might put a fentanyl patch on you. And believe me, if you're being given a fentanyl patch by an EMT after a traumatic accident, it's okay, because you will be in tremendous pain. And I don't want to scare anyone, but what's happening is people are getting this fentanyl, where, officer, from China? And they're sticking it in the heroin, and now we're finding, all the sheriff's offices are telling me, they're putting it in cocaine and even some marijuana. That's all the fentanyl it takes to kill you. And believe me, your dealers aren't measuring it safely. I had a group of, I call them kids because I'm 100. They were probably 20-somethings I was talking to. And one of them said, well, Deb, I trust my dealer. But this is the mindset. I've been using this dealer forever. I trust this dealer. Now, personal disclosure. In 2008, my niece, who was at the time 19 years old, young and alive, had the world ahead of her. She just graduated from high school. She was doing a gap year. You've heard of gap years? Pictures. It's all right. I'm just like not a picture person, but it's okay. You could, yeah, okay. Sorry, that's my own trauma. She went to bartending school, and this was in Pennsylvania, in the capital city, which is not Philadelphia and it's not Pittsburgh. Just wanted to make that clear. It's Harrisburg. So she was in bartending school, and her mother at the same time was in a car accident, and she was prescribed OxyContin. So my sister-in-law put her OxyContin in the medicine cabinet. She took about 2, and she said it made her loopy, so she didn't really take any more. But Katie got into it. And when it ran out, Katie went to the streets, and she had very easy access because it's easy to get drugs in bars. Okay? That's a great place to go if that's what you're looking for. Her mother came home one day and found her dead with a needle in her arm. This was 2008, and it was fentanyl. And it was one of the first fentanyl deaths in the Harrisburg area. But I tell you that why it's instructive to you. If you are put on a pain medication and you're not taking it, you need to get rid of it. Because you don't know. I know you think my kids are good, my this, my that. Don't go there. Just get rid of it. And there are places to get rid of it. I don't know about Port St. Lucie, yeah? Yes.
You can bring prescription medication, not over the counter, but prescription medication that is in either pill or capsule form to the police department, and we can have it destroyed for you.
And St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office, actually the same thing. So get rid of the stuff, and please don't give it to the fish. We have enough problems in our oceans and streams as it is.
Don't flush it.
Yeah, don't flush it. The next one is carfentanil. Have you ever heard of that? Yeah? I'm sorry. Yeah. Carfentanil is an elephant tranquilizer. It hardly takes anything. It hardly takes anything. You can imagine if it's used to bring down an elephant, what it'll do to a human being. And what's happening is the dealers, or actually up higher than them, are getting really, really smart. And so what they do is they just tweak these drugs a little bit. Now maybe change a hydrogen atom or something, and then it's something else. We call those fentanyl analogs. And we are seeing a spike in deaths from fentanyl analogs all across the Treasure Coast, not just here in Port St. Lucie, but Martin County is really seeing a spike. So, at that, I think you're next. Am I right?
am.
Okay.
So I want to introduce myself. My name is Officer Fred Knaggs. I've been with the police department here for Port St. Lucie for 13 years. I've worked road patrol. I have ran our Explorer program, that's youth that's interested in becoming in law enforcement or some sort of an attorney, something like that. Teaches leadership, citizenship. My current position is actually as a parks officer in the district support division. My current assignment, I've been here for approximately 8 years. So we had a citizen come to us and say, hey, we need to reach out to the citizens in our city. And I was told, you take it and go with it. So we put this together, and we hope that the information that we are presenting tonight is very relevant. But what I want to show you, the few slides that I'm going to go over here, kind of bring it to light as far as the numbers are concerned in our city here in Port St. Lucie. So the lighting might be a little off, and it's kind of hard to see, but I want you to look at the dates, January 2018 through January 2019. And then every red dot indicates an overdose, opioid related, in our city. There's no red dot up there that does not indicate an address within our city. So as you see, the victims of an overdose are 107 from that 1 year time period. So this bar chart kind of breaks it down a little bit, same time period, and it shows that the overdoses that are opioid related, you do see a spike in April through August, summertime. And that red line on the graph indicates the overdose deaths. So we have had 15 out of the 107 overdoses pass. So this here just kind of breaks down the age of the victims for the overdoses. And as you can see, the young adults, 24 to 34-year-olds, 25 to 34-year-olds, it's taken them by storm. So these are current numbers. January 2019 through December 2019, we went from 107 to 173 overdoses, with even more deaths of 22 last year, just in Port St. Lucie. So if anybody tells you that it's not an issue, they're wrong, because we have the problem right here with almost 200,000 residents in our city limits. So the problem is real and it is out there. So I'm going to have Dr. Dreher come up and speak about this. This is St. Lucie County numbers, and she'll go into the information on it.
If you think about those 173 overdoses last year, that's almost every other day. The first responders are responding to an overdose. We had 22 deaths. We are working on all of our first responders, police officers in Port St. Lucie and around the Treasure Coast are carrying Narcan, which is the antidote, but you got to administer it early enough in the overdose to save a life. So I think that's why we didn't see a lot more deaths. Now, in the county of St. Lucie, and it's the same for the city, what you see there, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but you see the spikes in the last two groupings, and that's fentanyl and fentanyl analogs, and I explained what those are. And I think part of the reason for that is it's definitely in all of the heroin, from what I'm understanding, and it's in some of the other drugs, as I already mentioned. Okay? Yes, sir.
Do you have any numbers of repeat overdoses?
I do not, but it does happen where somebody overdoses and then they're called back a few days later. Yes. We are trying, and I'm going to talk about it a little later, we are trying to help get people into treatment faster so that maybe some of that won't happen, but most assuredly there are repeat overdoses.
And one thing, if I could add
Yeah.
to that, yes. Are some of those numbers repeat addresses and repeat on the same victims? Absolutely, for sure.
Yeah.
But again, that is each time law enforcement and EMS have responded to an overdose. And again, I think although 173 is a significant number, I believe that red line indicates the most significant, because that is people in crisis that we are unable to get to in time. When I say that, I don't mean when they're struggling right then. I'm talking about the full struggle, all the way across the board. So that's what we're forgetting about. One thing I do want to add, so you do have the victims of these overdoses who they have their drug of choice. And I had somebody tell me earlier tonight that their loved one's drug of choice was heroin. However, when their loved one went to pick up their heroin, they were given fentanyl, 100% fentanyl, and that killed them. So even our victims who have years of crisis do not know what drugs they are taking. It's a serious situation.
One more. All right, now's the part my staff say, don't bore them, but I'm going to bore you, and I'm going to do it for a reason. It is helpful for you to understand that there are actual brain changes that take place when people take opioids, and that renders people unable to make the kinds of decisions that you'd make when you're not taking opioids. So, for example, telling someone they're going to end up dead, or that they're ruining their lives or their family's lives, isn't going to make them stop, because they're not able to process that information. They aren't able to look at the consequences. because all their brain energy is being taken up trying to get the next dose, okay? So I'm going to ask you to raise your right hand, not high, just like this. You're not going to swear to anything, I promise. I just want you to understand a little bit about the brain, okay? So I want you to think of your hand as a model of the brain. And I'm telling you this because maybe it'll help you deal with your loved ones, or even help you in a very simple way to explain the addiction process to others. Because a lot of times I talk to people about this and they go, well, they made a choice, and then I start teaching people. No, they didn't. This is a disease, and we need to treat it as such. So anyways, you got your hand up. So think of this part of the brain, the hand, your wrist, as being your brain stem. What is your brain stem responsible for? It's responsible for keeping your heart beating and keeping you breathing. It's taking care of you right now. Now fold your thumb over. This is the part of the brain where several things take place. One is, this is where you experience fear and stress. You know when you get upset and you start feeling your pulse racing and you start feeling your blood pressure going up? That's where it starts from. It's also the part of the brain that experiences reward. And I'm going to talk about that in just a minute, because that's where the opioids act in a way that causes addiction. And then if you fold over your hand, that's your cortex. That's the thinking part of your brain. Now, I like to say that people who have an addiction issue, this part of their brain is popped off, and this is the part of the brain that is functioning. And that's why reasoning with people doesn't really work. It works the same way for people who are escalated and angry, right, Ann, back there? You're not really able to reason with people. What we do is we try to respond to their emotional state and help them feel emotionally safe, okay? Now, why do we have a reward system in our brain? We have it to make us do things that keep us alive. Remember, everything that our brain does is designed for survival. So, holding a baby, you have a little bit of release of those feel-good chemicals. If you didn't, I'm not sure what some mothers would do with their babies at 3 in the morning when they're still screaming, right? Our brains were designed for us to attach to our infants and feel good about it. Our brains were designed for when we eat to have a little release of feel-good chemicals. Why? Because we need to eat to stay alive. Same thing when you drink, and I'm talking about water now, not alcohol. You have a release of the feel-good chemicals. Why? Because you need to drink to stay alive. That's why we have a natural reward system. We have natural chemicals in our brain that make us feel rewarded when we do things that help us survive. Okay? Thank you. And what happens is, in your brain, there are billions of neurons, and those reward chemicals are, I'm using my fist to show you because I have to hold this mic. They're making me. So anyways, one neuron releases some of those feel-good chemicals, and they attach to the next one. And that's what fires up your brain and makes you feel good. If you can go backwards one slide. No. One forward. There. That's the one I want. I don't know whether it was forward or backward. You can see that in a healthy brain, the cortex is lit up, this part, and you're thinking, but in an addicted brain, it's not really lit up, is it? There's not much lit up in the middle either. Why? Because after you've been addicted long enough, your natural chemicals to make you feel good are tamped down. You don't have as many of them. Okay, if you can go back where I was. One more. One more. I'm sorry, forward. Thank you. So, to ensure that we respond appropriately to our environment, the brain controls how we respond to the environment through all of those chemicals that are called neurotransmitters. This is high school biology, and I'll try not to bore you for more than 5 more minutes. Go ahead. Now, the two neurochemicals that operate with addiction are called dopamine and norepinephrine. I call dopamine that feel-good chemical that I talked about. Norepinephrine I like to think of as the wake-up chemical. And by wake up, it's the one that keeps you breathing and keeps you alive, okay? So what happens when you ingest opioids, fentanyl, heroin, Oxycontin? The opioids bind to those receptors in the brain, and some of them go to this part of the brain, right here. They don't all go to this part. Some go to this part. And what that does is it causes what we call the suppression of the wake-up chemical. So you have less norepinephrine, less of the wake-up chemical. What does the wake-up chemical do? It keeps your heart beating and keeps you breathing. So when you have less of it, your breathing slows down. That's what causes the death of opioids, is your breathing slows down. Okay? Next. Now, if you continue to take opioids, when you are on the opioids, your breathing slows down, but your body, do you remember? I told you it wants to survive. So it gets feedback that you're not breathing really well. So what does it do? It produces more of the wake-up chemical. So when you're withdrawing from the drug, the wake-up chemical levels are higher than normal, and that's what makes people agitated and maybe hyperventilating. And that makes you feel sick. It makes you feel restless. It makes you feel anxious. It makes you feel uncomfortable. It's not a good feeling when you have too much norepinephrine. All that is your poor body saying, I didn't have enough, now I need more, and it produces more than you need. Are you with me so far? Okay, 2 more minutes of neurobiology, I promise. Go ahead. The second thing that happens is opioids go to this part of the brain, the reward system. And the first time you take it, it makes you feel really good, apparently. I haven't, but apparently it's like euphoria, right? It is. And if you're already sort of depressed or you've lived through a lot of lifetime trauma, it's a pretty good feeling. I've had it described to me as like heaven. Yes? Makes you feel like Superman. That you could clean your whole house. I mean, it just does. It makes you feel really good. But your body senses that there's too much. So what does it do? Produces less. So with the norepinephrine, your body responds by producing more. But with the feel good, your body produces less. So that when you're on opioids over time, you are causing those chemicals to cause you to feel depressed. So you need it even more, right? And that's how addiction works. Now, most people will tell you in a state of addiction that they're no longer chasing the high. They're really just trying not to feel sick. They want more just to feel normal. And that's the addiction process, okay? You can flip again. What are some signs of opioid addiction? Now, I have 2 slides of these. I want you to read them because I hate reading slides to people. But I'm going to just explain a few. Mood swings, I just explained that, didn't I? You go from euphoria to depression, euphoria to depression. You're going to see slurred speech. You might see some presence of drug paraphernalia, spoons and whatnot, those little scalpel things to cut the heroin into the right amount. One thing people do, and my stepmother-in-law did this because she also was had an opioid issue. She went doctor shopping, and it was really dangerous because she was also a nurse. So she was really good at explaining symptoms and stuff to doctors in a way that gets them to prescribe what she wanted. Now, just to let you know what we're doing about that, the state of Florida requires all medical prescribers to check something called the PDMP, Physician's Drug Monitoring Program, I got it right, also known as E-Force. So if you come in to see me and I want to prescribe an opioid, I have to check it. And if I see that you just got some from a doctor 3 days ago, I'm not going to prescribe. The pharmacies are supposed to be checking as well. So that's something that we've been able to do about doctor shopping. Next. One of the ones I always tell people about is the skin itching, because that one surprised me. I don't know why, but when I think about it, it's probably all part of that norepinephrine thing. But you'll see, I was just a young kid again, a 20-something that I know, called me and said, I met this amazing girl. And I'm like, great. But she was standing there doing this. And I said, yeah, not so great. Just keep your eye out. Maybe she just has eczema, I don't know. But skin itching is a real big one with opioid addiction. You'll see nervousness, restlessness, especially when they're starting to go into withdrawal. A decline in personal hygiene and appearance, work problems, family problems, etc. So if you notice any of those things in clusters, not just one of them, but groups of those symptoms, you might have a person who needs to get into treatment. Go ahead. So what should you do? The first thing is Narcan, and I'm going to talk about that at the end, so I'm going to ignore that one right now. Certainly research treatment options so that when, and most people who have these issues at some point talk to someone and say, I have a problem and I really should get myself into some kind of treatment. Be ready with some treatment options so that you know. There's tons of them here. The problem here in Florida is most of them charge a whole lot of money. A whole lot of money. So, what we do in treatment is we try to address the driving issue, and we believe in treatment that the driving issue for most people, in fact, I'm going to say we run an MAT clinic, which is medication-assisted treatment, and I think the last number I got was about 95% of the people that come to us for treatment have experienced trauma in their lives. If not physical trauma, some kind of emotional trauma. I had examples. One day I worked the clinic because they were short nurses, so I went over. And back to back, 2 clients came in who had witnessed the suicide of their parents when they were 7 or 8 years old. That's trauma. You may have a family member that you think hasn't had any trauma just because they haven't told you about it. For example, rape. A lot of women keep it to themselves, but that is severe trauma. So we try to eventually get to that in treatment. But the biggest thing you can do is stop stigmatizing it. When you hear someone out in public say, well, they made a choice, why should we spend all this money on opioid treatment? We treatment providers can't be the only ones to say, no, this is a disease. We can't be the only ones. We need your help. We need all of your help in explaining the process of addiction to people and helping them understand that truly it is a disease. Think about somebody who has diabetes. What do we do for diabetes? We give them insulin, do we not? And metformin, or, well, yeah, some kind of, yes. We don't criticize them and say, well, you ate too much cake, so we're not going to treat you, right? She eats too much cake? Oh, well, that's not going to help. But my point is, and we medicate these diseases, but for some reason, nobody wants anybody to get any medication to help an opioid addiction, because everybody thinks that they did this on purpose somehow. So if you can help spread the word, all of you in this room, if you even talk to 3 people, that's going to be, I don't know, 60 people that might have a different mindset or a change of heart. So that's one of the things, and it's a big thing that you can do. And going to get treatment is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. And there are many places that provide treatment even on an outpatient basis. There are a lot of people that we see in our clinic who say, I can't go into detox for 30 days. Well, you don't have to. We will provide this for you on an outpatient basis so they can keep their jobs and maintain their family relationships. Now, I told you I'd talk about Narcan. Narcan is an opioid reversal drug. It is carried in injectable form. Do you guys do nasal spray?
Yes.
Okay. The EMTs have it injectable, but all of our police officers on the Treasure Coast carry it in nasal spray form, which means it's really easy to give. Now, here's the good news. If you have a family member or somebody who has an addiction issue, you too can get Narcan. I'm going to tell you how to use it. I'm going to tell you how to review how to use it, and I'm going to tell you where to get it. First of all, you can get it at CVS and Walgreens without a prescription. The state surgeon general essentially wrote a prescription for all of us to have it. Now, it'll cost you money. But not-for-profit community mental health centers do have it, and we will give it to you for free. New Horizons will give you Narcan for free, right over on the 4500 West Midway Road location. All you have to do is walk in the main building, go up to the front desk and say, I want Narcan. We will bring you in the back, we'll tell you how to use it, and we'll give it to you, and we're not going to ask a lot of questions, believe me. We're just going to say, oh, sure, yeah, we want to give it to you. Is there anything else we can do? Now, how does Narcan work? You will get 2 doses in the box. It's a nasal spray. Anybody here ever use Afrin nasal spray? I mean, anybody not ever use Afrin? It's that simple. So if you suspect your loved one has overdosed, and there's a way to tell, they're going to have shallow or no breathing, pinpoint pupils, and they're going to be almost comatose, if not comatose. Lay them on their back, hold one nostril, squirt all the Narcan in the other one, roll them on their side. It's that simple. Now, before you do any of that, you do one thing. Does anybody know what that is? Thank you, obviously, because this will only work long enough for the EMTs to get there. So I'm going to repeat myself. Call 911. Squirt the Narcan by holding one side of the nose and squirt it in the other. Turn them over on their side. Okay? The reason for that is they may vomit. And you don't want them to aspirate or swallow it and choke. But it's that simple. You will have a second dose in the box. You get 2 doses in every box. You wait 3 to 4 minutes. If they haven't woken up, administer another dose. Now, everybody asks me, what happens if it's not an overdose and I administer Narcan? And the answer is nothing. Now, if I collapse on the floor in the next 5 minutes, I don't need Narcan, I need CPR. I'm just letting you know. So the only real harm in using the Narcan is that you may delay starting the CPR. If you are CPR certified and the person has overdosed and their heart stops and they're not breathing and you know how to do it until the EMTs arrive. Are there any questions about Narcan? If you have a loved one, or you know someone who has a loved one, or you have a friend, please get Narcan. It's free. Yes, ma'am.
This is directed to Officer Knaggs. Can you share with us any changes that have arisen when a resident contacts 911 with an overdose case and how law enforcement responds.
Absolutely. So 2017 or 18, I believe our law changed where we were taught in law enforcement, we respond with rescue out to an overdose. We take the items that were used for the overdose, both the drug and the paraphernalia. We place that into evidence. Once the person that has overdosed comes out of their coma, they're feeling better, they get released from the hospital, we can show in lab reports, because we subpoena lab reports, we can show that they had that drug, and we take them into custody for possession of both the drug and the paraphernalia. Well, what we have noticed is that prison and jail time does not work for people who are addicted to opioids. So, there was a law changed, and I believe it's pretty standard throughout the country now. We do respond with fire rescue. One, for their safety, and two, because we need to document the incidents. However, what has changed is we're no longer looking to arrest the person who is in crisis, because now we know it is not just a junkie, it is actually a person in crisis. So we will collect the paraphernalia, we will collect any drug that may be left. It is then placed into evidence and then destroyed. So we do not make arrests for that.
What if it's legally prescribed?
Again, if it's legally prescribed and family members who are there with you or friends can show that you've been prescribed that, then that information goes into a police report, but it still needs to be taken from the scene because we can't leave a narcotic there with other people. Does that make sense?
You know, my niece, when she died, her dealer was with her. And when he injected her and she collapsed, he ran. He ran because it was 2008, and he knew he would be arrested. So he ran. So if you find somebody who's overdosed, please don't run. We're trying to save lives here. We're trying to get people into treatment. Don't run, help. You have a question, Lisa?
Yes, I just wanted to make sure the person who calls will not be arrested, correct?
The person who calls 911 to save someone else that may be in crisis cannot be arrested.
It's
Correct.
the Good Samaritan law. It was passed a couple years ago in response to this opioid crisis. So please know that.
Even if you prescribe, even if you administer or gave the person
You will not be arrested on
You will
this.
not be arrested at that time, no.
Yes.
No.
Commissioner.
So we all know of cases, and Fred, you might be able to answer this for me, where they find the dealer and they go back and prosecute. Because in many cases, it wasn't the overdose, but the death of that person overdosing. They still are doing that, are they not?
That they are.
Okay.
I believe Palm Beach County just had one where he was just sent to prison for being able to show that he was the dealer which caused a death, and he was charged with that death. What I'm getting at is someone that is there at the scene to save a life, okay? That
Yeah,
person who
just
called
save a life.
911 is not going to be taken to jail because there are drugs and paraphernalia in the home. Constructive possession used to be our way to take people to jail. But when we're there to save a life and 911's been called and someone's being transported to the hospital, we will document the scene. We will document the people that were there. but we're not taking people to jail. As what you said, Commissioner, yes, that will be investigated. And if we can prove, exactly, if we can prove that someone intentionally gave someone something, whether they were a dealer or something to that effect, we will start an investigation and that person can be arrested. What I want to stress is the person in crisis and the person that is trying to help that person in crisis will not be arrested for the possession of the drug or the paraphernalia that is there.
You question?
I was curious how long, like, does Narcan expire, how long it lasts, how it has to be stored, and if you would recommend, I personally don't know anybody that is a user, but I work in a public place, don't know when you could see it, even at the beach or whatever, and you mentioned it was free. Would you recommend, depending on how it needs to be stored, if there's just people like us on the street that would want to have that available?
The Surgeon General of the United States wants everyone in the United States to carry Narcan, so there you go. I'm not going against his recommendations. To answer your other questions, those are really good ones. It does expire after a couple of years, so check the expiration date and you can come back and get more. We'll give it to you more than once. Don't store it in a hot car. I've done that. I've had to go get more. And we're in Florida, so don't store it. No, I actually finally went out and got a bigger purse so that I could fit the box in my purse. So don't store it in a hot car. It does expire, but you can come and get more. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
Just a quick comment regarding
Do you want them,
I don't know, can they hear me?
We want to be able to hear you, Commissioner.
Okay, just to comment on that, I am a commissioner, county commissioner. I will tell you I have Narcan in my office. I continue to keep it there. We have 1,100 people on staff. I am obviously not around them all the time. I believe in the people that we have, but I've had my own family issues. I keep it there because I know there is no one that is immune to this crisis.
Really good point.
So I keep it right on a shelf in my office. I've got it there. God forbid I need it.
Thank you. We have another question.
Here recently, I had a young lady come to my house and she actually died on my back porch 36 hours apart twice. But the first time they did 4 things in Narcan and the second time they did 5. So if I go and get the Narcan, because my son is also an addict, if I go get the Narcan, is 1 going to be enough? It
Well,
wasn't enough. She turned blue.
You may ask for 2 boxes. What we're thinking of, we'll give you 2 boxes. That's 4 doses. The idea is that you have to call 911. I'm sure you did. But what happened is you might have hit it too late, and it's not your fault. If someone collapsed like my niece, by the time her mom got home, she was gone. Did she? Okay, and then the other possibility is when you give the Narcan, if you look up here, what it does is it knocks the opioids off the receptor. But the Narcan wears out and the opioids are still in there and they go back on. So we can revive you and then you go back into the coma.
And
so we'll give you 4, 2 boxes or 3, and but you have to call 911 first, which you did, but she may have just taken too much and they just couldn't save her. Uh-huh. 4500 West Midway Road at New Horizons. You know where it is? Okay.
I just have a quick question. The injectable and the nasal, is one quicker than the other?
Yes. The injection is going to be a little bit quicker. Not a lot. Yeah. Yeah. When you're injecting anything, though, you can modify the dose. So that's why you call 911 and you get the EMTs there, because they can do that. They will do the injections. And, of course, they'll take you to the emergency room to give you supportive ventilation and so forth. Okay, other questions? Yes, sir.
But when you talk about that there's treatment options, isn't the problem with the treatment options that many times people don't really feel like they need treatment?
Absolutely.
They're in denial.
Yep, this part of the brain is functioning. But there are things, and let me explain the treatment options, and then I think it'll help with that, but not completely. You're probably going to want to ask a little more after that. So, we talked about overdose one last time. Call 911. Check for responses, breathing, give rescue breaths if you can, administer Narcan on their back, hold nose, spray in the other one, turn them on their side. Okay. Don't ever, no, I'm telling you this because these are the things we've seen people do. Don't leave the person alone, like what happened to my niece. Don't put them in the shower. But, you know, there's nothing about being clean that keeps you from overdosing. That's something people do with people when they're drunk. It doesn't work for that either, just so you know. Don't give them coffee. It does not help. There's nothing about caffeine that will reverse an overdose, or alcohol, by the way. Don't try to have them walk around because they might fall and hit their head, and then you've got another problem. Slapping and hitting people, it does not work. And please, and we see people do this, try to inject another substance. Oh, she's overdosing on the heroin, I'll inject something else that I've got. Don't do any of those things. Call 911, administer Narcan, you won't get arrested. That's it. That's what you do in case of an overdose. Now, some of the treatments provided. I'm going to talk about medication-assisted treatment. Medication-assisted treatment is available for people who have an opioid issue. And what we do is we provide medications to people while we do the counseling. So you said sometimes they don't want to come into treatment. If you can even get them this far, the physicians, the nurse practitioners, the peer specialists, everyone will work hard to just try to engage them in treatment, and it is difficult, right? Yes, it is very difficult, but these people are pretty skilled at it. And what we do is we show people empathy and compassion. We help them with some of the other issues that they might have to get them to want to come back for some more help. We will do whatever it takes to get this person into treatment. Next slide. Now, some of the medications, you've heard of methadone. Everyone says, oh, I don't want methadone, not in my backyard. I don't want anyone on methadone. Well, here's the thing on methadone. Methadone is a replacement. It is an opioid. It acts like an opioid. It treats the brain like an opioid. The thing about methadone treatment is that you're getting prescribed doses of it. And people in methadone clinics, they're heavily federally regulated. You have to go every day for a very long period of time. They don't just give you a script for 30 days and let you go out and sell it. So methadone is treatment. But what it does is it helps regulate the brain again because you're on a consistent dose so that you're able to not go out and seek the heroin, and you're able to go into counseling and start working on your issues. There is a methadone clinic in Fort Pierce. We don't have it at New Horizons, but there are methadone clinics available. You know,
Doctors who comes to the QRT.
Dr. I know him. Yeah.
Works at the methadone clinic.
Okay. So we do, methadone's available if that's your choice. Another treatment that is done, and this one is considered one of the gold standards, is Suboxone. Now, Suboxone, it's an opioid, and then they stick Narcan in it. So it blocks the opioid receptors a little bit, but it also is an opioid. The thing with Suboxone, The actual drug is called buprenorphine, which takes 2 months to learn how to say correctly. But it attaches to the receptors, but it's kind of like a square peg in a round hole. So like an opioid will attach real cleanly into the receptor, but buprenorphine might do this. And it sticks there for a long period of time. It activates the nerves, but not fully. So it has what we call a ceiling effect. So you don't really get that high, but you also don't go into withdrawal. And when you're not in withdrawal, a lot of people tell us they feel more normal, and they're able to get jobs, and they're able to eventually engage in counseling. And eventually we can talk to them about what got them into this in the first place and the trauma and so forth and so on. Okay? So that's Suboxone. Another drug that is given is called Vivitrol. Vivitrol is an injection you get once a month. Vivitrol is great because it blocks the opioid receptors so that if you take the heroin, for the most part, you won't get high and you won't go into withdrawal. There are 2 problems with it. It works, but you have to be 7 to 10 days clear of any opioid before you can get on Vivitrol. Because if not, we'll give you the injection, you will go into something called precipitated withdrawal that is awful. So some people can't get clear for 7 to 10 days to get the Vivitrol injection. Now, for those of you who have lost loved ones like I did in 2008, this stuff wasn't around as much. People weren't talking about it. You know, it just wasn't there. We didn't know. So I want people not to be saying, oh, I wish I had done this or I wish I had done that. And all of these things work differently on different people.
From working with you on several things, we also know that the other downside of Vivitrol is that it is horribly expensive. Oh, yeah. So without a grant, it is not readily accessible. I don't know that insurance covers it, but you're talking about typically about $1,800 a shot. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to let you compare that to the Suboxone.
Okay.
And maybe if you know about the methadone and the difference.
I don't know about methadone,
Okay,
but Vivitrol is between $1,500 and $1,800 an injection. Who has that kind of money? Some insurances pay for it, but you know, it's pretty good insurance. There is a state grant that allows some not-for-profits. Ours gives Vivitrol, but we are very, very limited on the amount that we get because there's only so much money to cover the whole state for this stuff. So yes, it is out there, but it's a little tougher to get into Vivitrol because of the amounts that are being doled out to the different providers. Suboxone, though, a month's worth might be about $30-40. Am I too low? That's what we're doing. Yeah. Okay.
Question.
If yes.
My
we
thing
get
is-
we get some state funding to help offset it. So there you go.
Most people don't have the insurance.
No.
And to go to get the Suboxone, it's not only $200, you have to pay the clinic itself as well. So the one in St. Lucie County for when I took my son was $340 a month. Now, somebody who hasn't been working because they're an addict and somebody, they can't even get treatment without insurance. So if you don't have the kids and have Medicaid or have insurance because you're too old to be on your parents, you're in trouble in St. Lucie County.
There is. I'm not here to sell New Horizons because we don't need more people, but we do have Suboxone, and you can come without insurance. and you won't be paying. I'm just telling you. But I'm definitely not here. I don't want to. Our MAT clinic is so full. I'm glad none of my staff from the medication-assisted treatment clinic came, because they'd be crawling behind the chairs saying, oh my gosh, more people. But we will. So if you have someone, yes.
So the people that get on treatment and get on, or I wouldn't say use the word lucky enough to get on these drugs and be functioning, do they ever be able to get off of these drugs, or is this a lifetime repair for them?
This is a really, really good question. And the answer is it's different for everybody. We work with clients and we'll tell them, when you feel like you might be ready to taper, we'll taper you. You shouldn't ever just stop. I just read an article literally walking into this building that says that Suboxone should be a good 9 to 12 month thing, because that gives people time to regulate their brains enough, and that's kind of been our experience. But if you need it for life, you need it for life. It's like insulin. If you don't take the insulin, you're not going to live, right? How is this different? This is a brain disease. It's not. It just isn't different. It's exactly the same thing. When I first started teaching law enforcement officers some of this stuff, a couple of them, and this is back in the day, and you've spoken about this, although not tonight, but some would say, well, how many times should we go to the same house and give Narcan? And my answer is, every time. If grandma falls 3 times a week, you're going to go help pick grandma up, right? It's the same thing. It is a medical disease, period. It causes a chemical change in your brain, and we have to re-regulate your brain before we can get you back up and running. Yes. There. Do you guys, do they just come and get these meds, or is there? No. Do they get, like, mental? Yes, we provide counseling at the same time. Yes.
Okay, so now that the new kind of wrench thrown into the works is people who say that they're on medical marijuana.
Oh boy, you're taking me way where I don't want to go, because I came here to talk about what?
No, but they have the card for it. They're on medical
Uh-huh.
marijuana. And they still do other drugs. And then they say, but I'm on this medical marijuana, because that way I won't use blah, blah, blah.
I so don't want to get into this because I'm not really an expert in medical marijuana. I'm really not. I know opioids, but medical marijuana isn't it. But there are contraindications, and there are drugs that react with opioids. For instance, we see a lot of people that are on opioids or heroin or OxyContin that also take Xanax or other benzodiazepines. They potentiate, we use the word potentiate, the respiratory depression. So they make you not breathe even faster. I'm not sure and don't think marijuana does that. And medical marijuana is regulated, so you're getting it from a place that doesn't throw fentanyl in it. But I would want to make sure that anybody on medical marijuana is buying it at the proper place. That's pretty much all I'm going to say.
And medical marijuana has its place. It has its place.
To me, I went through the whole withdrawal thing. I was on it for 4 years and got off it finally. And everyone's like, when I told everyone what I was doing, I was going to stop taking the drugs, and they said, you should do medical marijuana. And in my eyes, it just saw replacing one bad habit with another. And that's why I chose not to do that. I'm still here. Thank God.
And you know, I want to address too, there are people who get off of this stuff, quote unquote, cold turkey. But the success rate is 20, 30%, and that's it. With Suboxone and methadone and these other medication-assisted treatment, the success rate is up in the 60% range. So I applaud people who are able to go that way, but not everybody can.
First 3 weeks of my
I'm sure it was. I'm sure it was. I think oh, that's for law enforcement. Are there any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, just so everybody can hear you.
I was just wondering if there are needle exchange programs available in Port St. Lucie, or if there's like an active effort to implement them.
There are not currently needle exchange programs in Port St. Lucie, but I'm seeing somebody who wants to talk about that, so I'm going to walk over here, and there is a committee.
So we are working on that. There was a pilot program down in Broward County. So now they are allowing the counties to start needle exchanges. But that is coming through the health department. At this point, they are talking about needle for needle, where some places, I want to say New York, you can take a needle and get two. But it will be needle for needle. I will be real honest with you. I think that next week I have an appointment with the head of the health department, because we are supposed to be talking about the laws in order to see whether we can start. Government cannot fund it. So once, even if we can get it up, we have to find private entities to fund it. So they give it to us, and then they block it. And but we continue the fight. So.
Thank you. I did forget one thing, and then I promise I'm done. The Treasure Coast does have an opioid task force. It is all volunteer. It is made up of law enforcement, hospitals, treatment providers, government entities. The general public is invited. What we're trying to do with the task force is we've created a program with the now Cleveland clinics where they call our mobile crisis unit, and we send a peer who happens to be sitting back there. And so if someone overdoses and your loved one's taken to a Cleveland Clinic hospital, they'll call and she'll come and she'll talk to them and try to help get that person into treatment. Lisa's really persistent, but if they absolutely refuse, she keeps calling. And she'll try to stay after people and just offer whatever she can. So that's one program that has been started. Of course, I mentioned that all of the police officers, law enforcement officers are carrying Narcan now. We're working on trying to get the word out to pregnant moms, because if you're pregnant and you're on heroin, your baby will probably be born with neonatal abstinence syndrome, so we're working closely with that. Go ahead.
I don't know if this question is for you or for Lisa, but you had mentioned earlier that they're very costly. So how does
What's costly?
The rehab center. So how would someone get in a rehab if they can't afford
Some of the rehabs are offering what we call scholarships. So they, we prodded them into doing that. That's part of the task force, is to beg for scholarship beds so that rehabs, but you don't have to go to rehab. You can also go to outpatient medication-assisted treatment. It's not done you're not in a bed. You get it, you go in and you get it, you see the doctors, you get the counseling, and you go home.
So they don't need a detox?
You don't have to, no. To go in Suboxone, we ask that you're in withdrawal for at least 12 hours, and we do a urine toxicology, and then we do something called induction. We'll give you a small dose, see how you're doing. The doctors will determine how much Suboxone you should be prescribed, and they will do that. And then we prescribe for usually 3 days, 5 days at a time, so you have to come back. And we don't give you enough to sell on the street. So that's one way. You don't have to go into a rehab. Yes?
Are there any programs in Port St. Lucie yet for the schools to give them education
Port St. Lucie's been for a long time. There's something called the SAP program, and we have counselors that are going in and teaching kids. One program is called Too Good for Drugs. One is called Too Good for Violence. And so, yes, they're being taught in all of these St. Lucie County schools. Yes.
We were talking about this, I don't know whether it got done, but we were talking about having the bus route go. It's not done. It's not done, but we're still working on it. Okay.
Yeah, transportation's an issue for a lot of people to get into treatment. But if you want to come to a task force meeting and join us in trying to help, another big part of the task force, I told you, I'm here from the task force. We will educate anyone, anywhere. I have literally educated on aisle 9 at Walmart. I'm not kidding. They asked for someone to come and talk to their employees, and they started taking us to the back. I thought we were going in a staff lounge, and they stopped between children's clothing and lingerie, and I thought, okay. So we gave a 10-minute talk about opioids. We will go anywhere to any group. If you ever want a speaker, we'll find you one. Our task force meetings are, Lisa, is it third Thursday or fourth?
Third Thursday.
You sure it's not fourth? I think it's the fourth. It's the fourth Thursday. Yes, it is. We changed it. It's the fourth Thursday of every month at 1:30 at New Horizons, just because we have a conference room. And you are more than welcome to come. And if you forget that, you can contact Pat here at Port St. Lucie Parks and Rec. Any other questions? And then I'm going to turn it back over to Pat to finish us up.
I'll save my applause for Dr. Dreher and Officer Knaggs for to the very end. But I did want to share just a few that I believe there's going to be a lot of nods in the audience. Just a few tidbits that I learned through my son's 8-year battle with opioid and with the addiction. But Danny was in and out of a minimum of 14 rehabs and recovery centers throughout the state of Florida during the 8 years that he battled. His family, my husband and I, were along with him each step of his journey through addiction. Through that journey, I personally have witnessed in several support groups with addicts the true struggle that these young people are battling. I've sat in witness during countless family visitations at several rehabs and recoveries, and it's just heartbreaking. The dozens of young men, and in my experience, they were young men. If I had a daughter, it would be young women. They share with the group how miserable they are, how this is not the life that they ever chose or wanted, and most of them know that they are literally killing their families, but they're powerless to stop the opioids. And addiction isn't fair. Why my son caught it and others don't is a mystery to us. But I believe that Danny knew that fateful Friday night that he did not want to continue living like he was. He had personally told me several times that he hated what he was doing to us, and he abhorred the cycle of abuse. Clean one day, relapse the next, seek recovery, stay clean, release, recovery, over and over again. He just wanted to be normal, but he could not. So his too short 22 years on this earth showed me one thing. The concepts of nature versus nurture go completely out the window when an opioid is involved. Dan was raised with scruples and morals. He knew right from wrong. He never hurt anyone other than continuously destroying himself, both physically and mentally. He was inherently kind, and he had a wicked sense of humor. But when he was faced with an opioid versus getting dope sick, he turned to the lure of the opioid. I'm a reader, and I've done a lot of reading on this subject of addiction and substance misuse disorder. But one of the more powerful and factual books that I've read is entitled Dope Sick, and the author is Beth Macy. And I'd just like to share a few facts that I found in that book. Opioids are now on pace to kill as many Americans in a decade as HIV/AIDS has since it began. Now, I'm an older, more mature person, but HIV and AIDS was huge in my day. Opioids is surpassing that in numbers. Last estimate, 2.6 million Americans are addicted to opioids. Dr. Mark Fishman, a Johns Hopkins researcher and MAT provider, said AA is not a scalable solution in an epidemic like this, and most opioid addicts just cannot do it without MAT. If an opioid addict remains sober for 1 year, just 1 year, she has a 50% chance of relapse. If she stays sober 5 years, her chance of relapse is less than 15%. Those are staggering numbers. In 1 week in October of 16, 19 people in the northern Shenandoah Valley region would overdose. That's 19 people 1 week. 17 of them brought back with Narcan. The Baltimore dealers continued to hot pack their heroin with fentanyl. An area naloxone trainer told this reporter, because when someone dies, customers flock to his dealer. They're chasing a better high. It's like I might lose 3 of my customers, but in the long run, I will gain 10 of yours. In 1898, Bayer's company doctor assured his fellow physicians, I have treated many patients for weeks with heroin without one observation that it may lead to dependency. Nothing is more powerful than the morphine molecule, and once it has its hooks in you, nothing matters more. Not love, not family, not sex, not shelter. The only relationship that matters is between you and the drug. And this one really cemented in my brain with my experience with my son. The average non-addicted person's perception of the future, that's a non-addicted person, is calculated to be 4.7 years versus an addicted user's perception of the future is 9 days. That's huge. That's their way of thinking, how am I going to get out of this dilemma? And all they can see is 9 days. My husband and I will never be the same. Every day we remember Danny for what he was to us, a good son who had a debilitating disease. Perhaps one day I'll be able to look back at the time that Danny spent with us and say thank you to God for those 2 short 22 years. But for now, while I don't want his life defined by his addiction, I will be stepping out to do what Dr. Dreher talked about, and that's to eradicate the stigma that's attached to opioid addiction. This can and does happen to everyone and anyone. There are no boundaries. I can see it in this room. I can feel it. It's palpable. It is affecting lives in this community, in this country. There are now numerous studies being done about substance misuse disorder. One of the latest research articles found that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection. That rings true for my son's journey as well. In the award-winning book Dreamland by author Sam Quinones, he concluded, I believe more strongly than ever that the antidote to heroin is community. If you want to keep kids off heroin, make sure that people in your neighborhood do things together, in public, often. Don't have play dates, just go out and play. And that rings true for my son's years through the battle as well. For those of you who follow headlines like I do, last Sunday, T.C. Palm published an article that, in essence, and I would defer you back to that article for more information, but essentially talked about Purdue Pharma, which Dr. Dreher mentioned, who is the manufacturer of OxyContin, that now the lawsuits are open to people like, for instance, myself, who lost an individual, a loved one, to this tragedy, to actually file a lawsuit against the manufacturer of OxyContin. So stay tuned for that. That lawsuit is in the ballpark of multi-million dollars for the impact that it has had throughout communities, throughout cities, states, throughout the federal government. To wrap up, and I promise, maybe if we had been more open about Danny's problems, someone could have gotten through to him through counseling, but we didn't, and no one did. And now Danny's gone. But it's my sincere hope that through awareness, through forums such as this, where we ask the questions, where we talk about it, where we acknowledge that it's there, it's not going away, as Officer Knaggs showed, it's getting worse, okay? That if I can help just one Danny in the future, This will make it all worthwhile. And if I can't do that, if I can just help one young man say no to an opioid the first time, it's the first time that does it, okay? Then all of this will be worth it. I cannot thank you enough for taking time out of your lives to come down and get this information. I truly hope you gained something from it. Every time I hear Dr. Dreher talk, I gain more information about this topic. There are two things I truly hope you walk away with. One was contributed from Dr. Dreher and one from Commissioner Bartz. And the first one from Dr. Dreher, this is a disease, a brain disease, period. That is what science has proven, okay? And the second thing that the commissioner mentioned is this can happen to anyone. It happens to all of us. So please, take what you gained from this, and I hope at some point that we were of benefit to you and your families. And thank you all again for coming out.